everybody. This is Hollisa Alewine. Welcome back to our continuing study into the question of Pharisee, friend or foe. I don't know that we've cleared up the question yet, but we've certainly looked at a lot of material that can give us the context for what the Pharisees believed and how it contributed not just to the conversations that we see people having in the Gospels, but also to John's revelation, to the vision of what he saw at the end of days. And there's a phrase, it's actually used more than once in the book of Revelation, that I think has been the reason, or it has been some sort of twisted proof text over the centuries that makes it okay to hate Jews in synagogues. And that phrase is the synagogue of Satan. In order to use that phrase to promote anti-Semitism, to hate Jews, to hate Judaism, you have to completely rip it out of its first century context, which is what we've been trying to unpack, and put it back into the proper context. So in the previous program, we read Revelation 3, 7 through 9. And we matched up what John was saying here about the synagogue of Satan, and then again about those who have kept the word, and put it back into that context of what the Pharisees were writing and believing about the world to come. That there was better positions, and then there were lower positions that they referred to at the feet of. So the righteous, those who could completely sold out to their faith, they would have that more honorable position. And then those who were lukewarm, intermediate, is usually the English phrase that's used, they would actually be at the feet of the righteous. It didn't mean they were out of the kingdom. It just mean they had a lesser reward. They had a lesser experience in a almost a creepy way. If you think about it, what we do today affects the quality of our afterlife. Not necessarily our salvation, that's a different issue. But what about the quality of reward that's coming to you? You actually are able to work, not towards salvation, but actually to acquire those deeds of righteousness that it says in Revelation, the robe of righteousness, it's actually the righteous deeds that you've done. And this is what Yeshua is saying in this revelation to John. He says, I put before you an open door, which no one can shut. In other words, Shammai, who rejected the Gentile convert, he can't shut that door on you. But he says, if I open it to the nations, if I open it to the Gentiles, and they want to keep my word, then they also can have that honorable, preferable place in the kingdom. And he says, I've put before you that open door that no one can shut. Shammai can't shut it. He says, you have a little power, and you've kept my word, and you've not denied my name. Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie, I will make them come, and bow down at your feet, and make them know that I have loved you. In other words, when we take a position of exclusion towards someone, then we're almost ensuring ourselves, short of repentance, when we believe that we have that greater place in the kingdom. And this is where we have to be really careful, because sometimes the more commandments we incorporate into our lives, the more we tend to look down on others. Especially they've not experienced that transformative power of the Holy Spirit to see the life in those commandments. If they've been conditioned and habituated to think that they're done away with, we have to be careful about looking down on those people where they are, because at the point where we think that we're inheriting or earning a greater place in the kingdom, that sense of exclusivity can be the very thing Yeshua is saying. You know what? He's saying you can't shut the door to those people and decide where they go. There's a process that only he really understands at this point that's going to decide where he places us in his kingdom. And if your mindset is one of exclusivity, if you're deciding where people go in the world to come, He says, you know what? I might make you come and bow down at the feet or have a lesser place to somebody in my kingdom who did keep my word, who did the best with what I gave them. And he says, and I will make you understand that I've loved them. And that's what he's saying to the house of Shammai right here. This is what he's saying to the seed of Satan. Why is it the seed of Satan? Because it's twisted the actual word. Instead of the Torah being the prophecy of eventual inclusion of all nations, he said, you've basically practiced it as a doctrine of exclusion, so that you're the only one. You can't have that attitude. And if you have that attitude, then that phrase that the Pharisees developed, at the feet of the righteous, where you thought you were going to be the righteous one, you're going to be the one with that lower place. And you're going to know that I loved these Gentiles. Which again, that's been handed down to us through rabbinic literature over the centuries of the great love that Adonai has for the Gentiles who come into the covenant and who convert into the faith. So it is important for us to understand who the synagogue of Satan was, or could be, depending on who was having the argument in the first century. It's not a damnation of all Jews. It's not a damnation of all synagogues. It's an intra-faith argument. What we need to know about the argument between the Pharisees was that, yes, as Paul preached, coming from the house of Hillel, the Gentile can be included if they will keep my word. Then I will reward them with a valuable place in my kingdom. We can't take that phrase and use it as an excuse for anti-Semitism, speaking against synagogues, speaking against Judaism, because the Father's not going to tolerate that. Yeshua's not going to tolerate that. And John would have never envisioned that when he wrote that statement. The synagogue of Satan message and revelation is one of inclusion of the righteous Gentiles, not the damnation of all Jews. And we'll only really understand that if we do understand the differences between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. Otherwise, we will take that phrase and make something really destructive out of it, as it has been over the centuries. And we don't want any part of that, because when we take on that arrogance of thinking we are superior, then that's when we're putting ourselves in real jeopardy and getting a door shut in our faces. We have to think about that. So, in a nutshell, just to recap, the synagogue of Satan, it can refer very specifically to that first century school of Shammai, Pharisaical school of Shammai, which rejected the inclusion of converts from the nations. There was one rabbi, specifically Rabbi Eliezer, it helps us in kind of deciphering this, who was specifically called the seed of Satan by the school of Hillel. And Paul was a member of the school of Hillel. The Hillelite Pharisees embraced the Gentile convert that wanted to be included in the nation of Israel if they would keep the word. And the house of Hillel rejected the pride of the Shammaiite. They rejected the pride of the seed of Satan that would have damned the Gentiles eternally to the prison of Sheol. To Paul, to the school of Hillel, excluding Gentile converts to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was a very un-Jewish position. And this is where we get that phrase, who say they are Jews, but they're not. You're saying if they were really Jews, they would be proclaiming this doctrine of inclusion, just as Yeshua's disciples and Yeshua's apostles proclaimed a gospel of inclusion. So, again, we can even see this in John the Baptist, as he's warning people that just because you're descended from Abraham doesn't secure you anything. It doesn't secure you anything in the world to come that will free you from the consequences of your life, from the way that you've chosen to live your life. Don't think because you're the seed of Abraham that you automatically merit this high place in the kingdom. Nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, when John the Baptist, or if Yeshua calls a Pharisee a hypocrite, what does that tell you? Well, the definition of a hypocrite is an actor under an assumed character. It means a stage player. Somebody who acts on a stage. They're taking on someone else's identity, but that's not truly who they are. So if he's talking to Pharisees and saying, you hypocrites, that should tell you that the true Pharisee is not embodied in the behavior of this one being called a hypocrite. Because this hypocrite is merely acting like he's a Pharisee. Is that a new way of looking at the Pharisees? When you call someone a hypocrite, you're saying the authentic person is out there, but it's not you. You're only acting like you're that authentic person. You're only pretending. So he's saying to those particular Pharisees, you're only pretending to be a Pharisee, because according to the Pharisees' own code of ethics, you're departing from it. You're not authentic. You're an actor on a stage. You're lying about your true identity. Because if you truly believed in the judgment, in the afterlife, you wouldn't be acting like this. If you truly believed in the judgment for sin and reward and punishment, you would clean the inside of your heart as well as these staged behaviors that you think are going to make you avoid Sheol. Instead of being that person of righteousness, you've become a person of lukewarmness. You've become the intermediate. You have a form of godliness, but truly you've denied the power. And that's what John wrote. He said, you have a little power and you've kept my word. Right? What power is it? It's that transformative power of the word. That even if you are being a hypocrite, if you will recognize it, the word has the power to change you into that authentic Pharisee, into that authentic Christian, into that authentic Jew, into that, most importantly, disciple of Yeshua. He's saying, if you weren't a hypocrite, you would be a Pharisee both inside and out, because their code of ethics, their standards of ethics, and their faith principles, that bar was very high. So what John is warning in Revelation to the synagogue of Satan is that there's going to be those who have been humbled in this life. They're going to have been looked down on in some way as being inferior, excluded. But if they will be faithful, he says, if you'll have a little power, if you'll let the power of the word transform you and you keep his word, you're going to find that once you enter into the garden, that even though you were this humble person in this life, that others thought they had a higher and better position than you, you may walk in there and find that all of a sudden you're inheriting a rich position that those proud people believed that they were entitled to, simply by virtue of exterior works or by pedigree. In fact, the righteous are given 2 crowns. It mentions one of those crowns in Revelation 2, the crown of life. It says in Revelation 2:8, the first and the last, who was dead and has come to life, says this. So we know we're on a resurrection topic, a Pharisaic topic. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and they are not, but are of a synagogue of Satan. You see a pattern here? Now that you have context, it's easier to decode what John is saying. He says, don't fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So you'll remember, Yeshua warned people, if somebody invites you to a banquet, and this is part of the mindset of entering into the garden, what has been passed down to us is a belief that when you enter into that Garden of Eden, that lower garden or paradise, that first you'll see Adam, the first Adam, and then you're going to sit down at a banquet at a meal with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So when Yeshua says banquet, there's a double meaning there. And Yeshua says, when you're invited, don't take the best place at the table. Don't walk in looking for the best place. Instead, choose a low place. And what you'll find is when the master comes in, he's going to say, wait, what are you doing way down here? I got a place for you up here at the head of the table. And he's teaching this particular mindset. Don't assume by virtue of anything you've done or who you are genetically that you're going to have a superior place and just seat yourself there. Wake up every day with a humility of spirit. And this is reflected in the ethics of the fathers, the Pirkei Avot, the things that have been handed down to us from the Pharisees. It's this overwhelming sense of humility that we have to adopt every single day of our lives. And if we don't adopt that humility, then we're not what a Pharisee was supposed to be, which is humble. If we look at Luke 11:43, Yeshua addresses that hypocritical mindset. He says, woe to you, Pharisees. Why does he say you Pharisees? Well, there's two different kinds. Woe to you, Pharisees. You love the best seat in the synagogues and the greetings in the marketplaces. What is he saying? If you're a hypocritical Pharisee, then you're not living that life of humility. You're coveting the best seats in the synagogue. You're coveting those greetings of honor in the marketplaces. So we have to be careful. What are we doing that is also hypocritical? We want to have the true humility of a Pharisee, that a Pharisee, an authentic Pharisee, is supposed to have. Not a hypocrite who's playing at being a Pharisee. So what does that mean? We don't seek out the honor of other people. We don't seek out the best place at the table. We don't need 100 likes on Facebook to feel good about ourselves because we're humble. We know we don't deserve any more every day than what the Father is providing for us. We don't have to go out and seek the attention of other people to know that we can inherit the better, more valuable places in the kingdom. And that's what Yeshua is saying. He's saying there's danger in coveting notice of others for your religiousness, for your piety. It's funny, the Pharisees write about the characteristics of hypocritical Pharisees. And they say one type of Pharisee is the one who will perform a commandment and then he will ask you, oh, is this the right way to do this? And he doesn't want to know if he's doing it right. He wants you to notice he's doing it right. And so the Pharisees themselves understand when someone is being a hypocrite, when they're being proud, when they're not keeping a commandment because they love the Father, and this is who they are as a transformed person of the Word. No, instead they're performing this commandment. So you'll be sure and watch them do that. And you'll think that they're more righteous. And so that you will place them up on that pedestal. He says that's dangerous. You don't want to draw attention to yourself for your good works. And you get that, to you for your good works. Instead, you want the good works to glorify the Father in heaven. It's the motivation of the hypocritical Pharisee that's different from the Pharisee that simply does it because it's going to reflect, as it says in the rabbinic literature, that the glory that rested on Israel was actually so the nations would attribute that glory to the one who gave it to them at Sinai. What other nation is there on earth that has such wonderful laws and so forth? When you redirect that attention to yourself, then you're the hypocritical Pharisee, not the genuine Pharisee. And that, he says, can result in you finding yourself at a very low place in the kingdom. In fact, being at the feet, figuratively speaking, of someone that you thought you were ahead of them. You thought you deserved that better place. So when you crown yourself on earth, he's saying, there's no crown for you in the kingdom. You've already worn your crown. And you'll get that, I think, when you get there. How foolish it is to draw attention to yourself for your piety on earth and stick that crown on your head. I mean, just like the third convert. I want to be the high priest. I want to wear the crown right now. Well, Hillel let him find out. And to begin to be humbled by the word to the point where I don't need that crown. You know what? It's better to have nothing on this earth and to receive a crown of life in the world to come. But there is actually context when we're looking at this idea of bowing down at someone's feet. And you may not like the context. It's probably been juicier and funner to say that all synagogues are of Satan. But if we look at the original context of the phrase, you may not like what it says. It's in Isaiah 60. If you want to read full context, read the whole chapter. I want to point out Isaiah 60:14. It says, the sons of those, and those in context is the Gentile nations, who afflicted you, Israel, will come bowing to you. And all those who despised you will bow themselves at the soles of your feet. You're saying, okay, now how am I supposed to think about that? In Revelation, I get the same phrase. I will cause them to bow down at your feet and to admit that I have loved you. But it's flipped around. It's saying those who call themselves Jews, but they're not. Well, we see here the original context is that it's going to be Israel. It's going to be the Jews who took on that identity as Israel after the destruction of the temple. It's going to be those, Isaiah prophesies, who are going to be elevated while all the Gentile nations who have afflicted them will come bowing down at their feet. And this passage is actually in the consolations to Israel, assuring them that even after destruction, after exile, they're going to be regathered and restored. And those nations that tried to destroy them will instead bring their wealth to worship in the holy city. So what can we say? You say, well, you just give me two totally opposite ways of looking at this. No, I haven't. I've given you the same way. I'm saying one thing, but you're hearing two. That's the way of Scripture. It's the hypocrites that are being pointed out. Again, having the full context is important, so I would advise you go back and read the full context of Isaiah 60. But to the extent that those hypocrites among the nations have believed themselves to be the agents of God in destroying Israel and despising his people, despising Jews, it says they will be lowered. In fact, we see the prophetic judgments on Israel have a definite endpoint. The hypocritical Gentile nations, Isaiah is saying, who justify persecutions of Jews, while they're sinning even more grievously, will one day be stopped. And that's kind of the irony of some people, once they take on the Bible as their own, how can they continue to denigrate Jews and Judaism? How can they do that and become instruments of affliction to Jews when hypocritically they're violating the rules of the very book that they claim is their faith guide? That's hypocritical. And so everybody here is being shut up in sin in some way. Deuteronomy 32:27 says, "Had I not feared the wrath of the enemy, lest their adversary should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is high, and it is not the Lord who has done all this." See, that hypocrite from the nations who has persecuted Israel, who has persecuted the Jews, will one day bow down at the soles of Israel's feet. And so here's the good news. So I said I was really only telling you one thing, even though I gave you the two ends of the spectrum here. The good news is this: not every Gentile among the nations is a hypocrite, any more than every Jew or every Pharisee was a hypocrite. When we take Isaiah and when we take Revelation and we put the two together, we really get one message. Whatever you are, if you're not a native-born Jew or Israelite and you're keeping his word and you're not a hypocrite, he's saying, hang on. I'm making room for you at the table. If you're native-born and you're clinging to that word, he's making room for you at that table. But if you were a hypocrite, either from the nations or from Israel or within Judaism, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you were living hypocritically and thinking it's okay to persecute people and exclude people by virtue of who you think you are in God, who you think you are, then there's going to be judgment on that, because he's saying, you're misunderstanding. You were just the instrument of my wrath to discipline my people. At the point you think you're somebody, because I used you, you're going to find out I'll make you bow down at their feet of the very people you thought you were better than. And that's a warning to us. We need to be really careful when we find ourselves looking down on other people because we have such a great position of righteousness. Take on a position of humility. Take the lowest place at the table, and then let Yeshua move you up, if you will.